Anti-fossil fuel policies such as net zero has contributed to an energy crisis, certainly being felt in Australia, but also all around the world. That energy crisis is now threatening global food supplies, despite the fact we have the means of production, fossil fuels. For more on this, here on Outsiders, we are delighted to be joined again by the author of Fossil Future: Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal and Natural Gas, Not Less. Alex Epstein. Alex, great to see you. How are you? Welcome back to Outsiders. How have you been?
I'm doing great. This is definitely one of my favorite shows, and I don't just say that to every show, so I'm very excited for whatever we get to talk about.
Well, I think I'm just taking a punt here, just a wild guess. I thought we might talk about the energy crisis. What do you reckon, Alex? Take it away. Tell us what's happening in the States.
Given that I've been warning about this for 15 years,
exactly.
I'm glad that people are starting to pay attention now.
Yeah, so tell us what's happening in the States and then give us your perspective on what's happening here in Australia.
Well, so I think different places are experiencing it in different ways. In the United States, the number one focus at the moment is rising gasoline prices. That's what people are obsessed with. But maybe even the scarier thing is our grid is in really bad shape. We're getting warnings at a national level about blackouts all around the country. And so Europe is much worse. I was in Egypt about a week ago and talking to people, and their food prices they're talking about have gone up by a factor of 3 over the past 5 years, particularly recently. So the poorest people are being hit the worst. And essentially what's going on around the world is very, very simple. I've talked about it many times on Rita's show, where she's been gracious enough to have me, which is that we suppress the supply of fossil fuels by restricting investment, production, and transport. But that didn't change the fact that there was still going to be demand for fossil fuels, because unlike the lies being told to Australians and Americans and Europeans, unreliable solar and wind cannot rapidly replace fossil fuels. So if you suppress the supply and demand stays the same or grows, you're going to get skyrocketing prices and tragedies in the poorest parts of the world where they can't afford energy and increasingly can't afford food.
James.
Alex, tell us about what is happening in the U.S. right now and what this means for Australia, which is watching this and yet somehow not heeding the warning. Because what I've seen is the Biden administration demanding that the fuel companies, the energy companies, make more energy now, at the same time saying, we're going to shut you down. Yeah. In 5 or 10 years. Why would any energy executive rationally agree to this sort of deal? And what is the lesson for Australia, where here in Sydney, the most populous city in the country, we were told to turn off our dishwashers the other night?
Well, I think we're all experiencing it, including I've been looking at some of the news out of Australia, and those kinds of things should be ominous. We should consider it embarrassing that we're worried about blackouts in the modern world. We have no inability to produce electricity. We know how to produce fossil fuels. There's no shortage of them in the earth. We've got plenty for generations to come. And so it's all about policy. So when we see things like our gasoline prices are skyrocketing, our electricity is becoming less reliable, we're being warned about don't use your power at a given time of day, we have to understand this is all policy. So I think in the US, what's happening is people are waking up. They know that Biden ran on, I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel. And now he's begging Venezuela for fossil fuels, begging Saudi Arabia for fossil fuels, demanding that the industry produce more fossil fuels when he promised to punish them for that. He's passing new SEC regulations telling them not to produce more fossil fuels. So Americans are waking up, which is making his popularity go down. And so instead of reversing course, which he needs to do in a fundamental way, he's just blaming everyone else but himself and his movement. But I think that people are seeing through this, and I'm very excited that at least this crisis is leading to a wake-up call in the U.S., and it better lead to one in Australia, because you guys have no nuclear and have an insane policy right now.
Rita?
Well, I don't think it is a wake-up call, because we don't seem to take notice of anything happening anywhere else in the world, whether it's North America, whether it's the UK. And I wanted to ask you about Germany, because they went into renewables very strongly, did a lot of things we're now going to be doing. And what's happened there with prices and with their policy?
This is one of the examples I discuss in Fossil Future, particularly in chapter 6 on all the different alternatives, because this is a case where you have a modern country, very wealthy country that's gone very much into solar and wind. And they've had enormous, enormous problems. Their prices have skyrocketed. They pay 3 to 4 times what we pay in the US. Their retail prices have doubled in the last 20 years. And it's getting much worse. In particular, what we see is when you use solar and wind, you are incredibly dependent on natural gas because solar and wind can always go near zero, and natural gas is by far the best thing to back them up. And so what Germany saw is they did not do anything to ensure their supply of reliable natural gas. Of course, they idiotically shut down their nuclear power plants. And so what you have is a total tragedy where not only do they have incredibly expensive electricity, but they also have huge dependence on Russia. And the final thing I want to say that applies to everyone is most of these fuel markets are global markets. And so the anti-fossil fuel global movement is hurting everyone right now. And you're seeing this with skyrocketing prices on the different grids. We're seeing this in the US, you're seeing this in Germany, and the consumers are going to get these astronomical power bills either directly or through even more government debt in a time of inflation.
So, Alex, let's also talk about fertilizers and food, because you talk about the Human Flourishing Project, and humans flourish with food. We've seen in Sri Lanka, for example, they decided to ditch fertilizers, which are made from fossil fuels, and go fully organic, and they've now got people starving. They've got all sorts of problems. It's a socialist government. It's people are literally starving in the streets and rioting. Tell us about that side of fossil fuels.
The way I think about fossil fuels and food is fossil fuels are the food of food, because what they do is they do 2 big things. They power all the amazing machines that allow us to produce enough food for 8 billion people. And as you indicated, they are the basis of the fertilizer. We use natural gas as the physical basis of fertilizer, as well as energy to make fertilizer. And so when natural gas prices skyrocket, fertilizer prices skyrocket, which means food prices skyrocket. And you talk about a place like Sri Lanka that's voluntarily in some way abandoning fertilizer, but essentially what rising prices mean is people have to involuntarily abandon fertilizer because they can't afford it. And a world of 8 billion people cannot be supported without fertilizer, and it cannot be supported without cheap fuel. So one point I make in chapter 4 of Fossil Future is we live in an amazingly livable world, but it totally depends on all these amazing fossil fueled machines, including agricultural machines, including fertilizer production machines. And the warning I gave in the book is if you don't recognize this and you restrict fossil fuels without a replacement, you are going to kill a lot of people. And unfortunately, that's what's happening.
Alex Epstein, you do sensational work. I urge people to go out and buy and read Fossil Future, your book, Alex Epstein. There it is on the screen. A must read, and the more people, politicians, academics who actually read it and learn something about what is really going on and the insane damage that is being done by climate alarmism. Thanks so much, Alex Epstein, for coming on to Outsiders, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you very much.